Okay, I think we're live. Okay, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us today. Today we're chatting with Chad Anderson, who is currently based out of London. He's the managing director of the Space Angels Network, which is a community of angel investors interested in space-related startups. He also works with the UK government to develop and commercialize the UK space industry through accelerating startups and trying to get finance going to the startups. In the past, he's worked with a space robotics company to develop the first ever market assessment for commercial lunar transportation. He's worked as the director of finance for an aviation startup and as business manager for JPMorgan Chase. Chad holds an MBA from the University of Oxford and also finance and economics degrees from Seattle University. Chad, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you. Very happy to be here.
So today we'll run it pretty informally. I'll probably start out with a couple of questions, then if anybody from the audience has any questions. If you're joining us watching the broadcast on PushTribe, there should be a link that says Ask Questions. Put it up over in that direction on the page. That will take you to the live Google Hangouts page where you can ask questions live. Or if you want to send them to my email, I'll check my email throughout the event. It's dan@pushtribe.com, dan@pushtribe.com. All right, cool. All right, so I'll start off with a couple of questions. So Chad, just to start out, what is the new space race and how is it different from the old one?
The original space race in the Apollo days was something led by governments, and it was military and defense driven. The space race that's happening today is much different, and it's commercial, and it's driven by private enterprises. So there's a few different names for the space race: New Space, Space 2.0. People are calling it a lot of different things, but the general theme is the same, that it's a new approach to space. It's no longer, space agencies and governments and big government contractors will always have a role to play. And organizations like NASA and things like that. They push the boundaries of science, and they expand our understanding of the universe and do some very, very, very cool things. But space has been inaccessible to most of us. And so what the private space race is doing is taking a business approach to space in terms of commercializing space and bringing the solar system within our economic reach. And so really, it's a paradigm shift towards private companies making space accessible to you and me, essentially. And I mean, you asked what's different. I mean, it's really the engines of entrepreneurs and startups that are really disrupting a incumbent market that's been around for 50+ years.
Why is this happening now? Because I think a lot of people in the public, they've seen the retirement of the space shuttle, and I think for a lot of people, there was kind of this. A lot of people thought that was kind of the end of space exploration, at least in the United States. Why? So with that, which I'm sure you'll explain isn't true, but with that, why is the new space race happening now? Kind of what are the trends, and is there anything big that happened that kind of spurred this on, or has it been happening kind of in the background? And now it's just starting to get to a stage where actually we notice things starting to happen.
Yeah, I think we all know now that that the fears that were going around about the space shuttle being retired and the end of space exploration was not true. I mean, I think that we all know that now. What happened actually is the shuttle was retired because it was completely uneconomical. I mean, they had originally it was meant to be a reusable spacecraft that would go up and service the International Space Station at a price point that made sense. But there's this huge infrastructure behind the huge NASA machine, and the overheads associated with operating a space shuttle just don't make much business sense. I mean. They didn't get out of the game with no ace in their pocket or cards in their hand. I mean, SpaceX was developing quickly behind the scenes, and there's today we've got SpaceX resupplying the space station and orbital as well. they're doing it at a much lower cost. And the thing is that going to my previous point, I mean, space agencies are really good at pushing boundaries and doing things that don't have an economic or business case at the moment. But when it becomes routine, there's an opportunity for commercial businesses to step in and basically for NASA and other organizations to pass the torch on to somebody who's much better at doing things efficiently and that sort of thing. So this is sort of the second start to this new space race. I think that the original one began at the beginning of, or at the end of the 90s, when so Eric Anderson founded Space Adventures. It's the only company today that's taken private astronauts to the space station, so space tourists, not in the sense of Virgin Galactic or X-Corps, and suborbital tourism, but actually taking people to the space station to live in microgravity like a cosmonaut would and going through the training. I think that inspired a lot of people, and there were a lot of would-be entrepreneurs began starting businesses, towards the end of the 90s and the early 2000s. And a lot of those weren't successful, and there was a number of reasons for that. It was sort of a false start of the industry. And what's different, this time around from then is a few things. One is back then there wasn't accessible or affordable launch, which is key. I mean, in terms of accessing space, it seems obvious, but there wasn't an easy way to get to space, and SpaceX and others have sort of got that problem licked, and so the reduction in launch costs, which with reusable rocket technology, building rockets so cheaply that they can be thrown away, suborbital launch, small dedicated launchers, all these types of things are continuing to bring the cost down, and so it's becoming more and more accessible. So there's three trends probably: reduced launch cost, miniaturization of technology, just means you can do more with less, so you don't have to send as much to space to do the same job, and standardization. So think of intermodal shipping, so that big container that you see that goes on trains, trucks, and boats, and it all just sort of fits. There's huge efficiencies in doing things that way and having a sort of standard platform, and as more businesses get involved here, it's starting to go in that direction. So those are the three big trends, but I would say that maybe even, as important as all of those is the business mindset that entrepreneurs are bringing to the table this time around. So what you see this time is a lot, you still see the enthusiasts, which, enthusiasm is important, but you've got entrepreneurs treating space businesses like businesses. I mean, you see a lot less people coming to the table saying, give me $1 billion, give me $1 billion for my startup and I'll build you a space plane. You see people coming to the table with measured approaches, focusing on customers and who wants to buy what and what's feasible. And I mean, I've got a really good story that I like to tell. It's about X-Corps Aerospace, and I mean they're a company that's building suborbital planes, and they've completely bootstrapped the entire thing, which is sort of unheard of until this era of new space, right? I mean, they knew that you couldn't come out and ask for $1 billion, so what they said was, they started with the smallest component that they could make that had commercial value, where they had expertise, and they started from rocket engine igniters and built up the engines and slapped an engine on the back of an experimental aircraft, and then was flying around a rocket plane, and now they're building a suborbital space plane and testing it, and they're putting the fuselage together now, and they're neck and neck in the race with Virgin Galactic, and it's two very cool companies and two very different business models, and it's just really cool to see the approach that a practical business mindset, saying build something, sell something, get some customers, get some traction, get some more funding, right? And just do it whatever way you can to get to where you need to be.
Since for anybody who tuned in late, if you want to join the live session and ask questions, there should be a link kind of up to the right on the Pushchat page that will allow you to join the Hangout and ask questions. I'll ask a few more until people get here. So you mentioned that now things are becoming economically feasible with the cost of launch dropping. Could you explain a couple of those opportunities? I mean, we see things like they're very popular in the news, like space tourism. You mentioned space adventures, like Nextport. Well, what's kind of the next step after that? Once we have accessible access to space, a little bit cheaper, what things are possible?
This is a fun question. So use your imagination here. There's 8 areas of investor interest really that are sort of generally accepted, and it goes from sort of feasibility to, industry that's making money now to where it could be. And I'll just lay those out real quick because it's I've got this on my package as well if you'd like to check it out. There's a graphic there that helps to explain this. But you go from satellites to launch providers to human space flight, microgravity research, habitats and real estate, in-space services, so that's refueling and debris removal, repairing satellites, this type of thing, space resources, so on-planet mining, in-orbit mining, space robotics sort of realm, and then space energy. And that goes from sort of today to sort of very far out in the future with space energy. The thing is that we're building to a point where really, really cool things can happen. And some of them are happening now. Some of these Google Lunar X Prize teams are competing to get to the moon at the end of next year, have really big plans to build a sustainable business. Would they be able to get there if SpaceX, or others weren't there to give them a ride? I don't know. We're putting space robots on the moon built by private companies and individuals, and it's the seeds of infrastructure on the moon, power, communications, I don't know, using the in situ resource utilization, so using the stuff that's there to, print parts you need, print habitats you need, print things like that, right? And so we're starting to get into some really, really fun stuff, but it's not that far into the future. Reduced access to space allows you to put up satellites and identify asteroids and start building, upon that capability. We've got people who are really far along in terms of development of commercial space stations. What happens then, and what could you use with a commercial platform like that? Yeah, without getting too far out into, sort of futuristic stuff, there's a lot of really, really cool stuff in terms of space robotics and autonomy, and constellations of spacecraft and platforms like a commercial space station, which could also translate to a lunar station and things like that, that are really, really exciting.
But in terms of all those opportunities, kind of where are we at now? Kind of what is the timeline for that? Like what's happening now? What's kind of like 5 years down the road? What's kind of 2 years down the road?
Yeah, so there's a lot of really cool things happening now that I find a lot of people don't realize. So launch costs are coming down quickly. There's more and more new entrants entering the market. So everyone's familiar with SpaceX, but there's other launch providers coming on the scene that are adopting a lot of different models, and it's fun because it's like, in business school terms, it's an innovation ecosystem or a nascent market, and you're seeing all of these new ideas and people thinking outside the box and trying all different types of things. And one day we're going to set, someday soon we're going to settle on a dominant design, one that provides low cost, affordable, dedicated, accessible service. And I'd say right now there's a lot happening in the satellite space, and a lot of disruption happening in a big, big industry. So there was an article written not too long ago that was really good talking about mainframes in space, and this was on the back of the Skyhawk imaging acquisition by Google. And what we have in space are these giant bus-sized satellites, you know, with very limited processing power compared to what we have on Earth. Low-cost access to space allows us to try new things, get things up into space that could break. You know, we're willing to take risks, whereas before, if it cost us hundreds of millions or billions of dollars to get there, we were pretty risk averse and didn't want to, you know, take chances. So there's a lot of innovation happening there, using small shoebox-sized satellites, many of them, 30, 100, 150 of these things, to cover the Earth and give us global access, where before we had one satellite doing this thing that cost a lot more money. Like I mentioned, I mean, with the tests that Virgin have done lately, I mean, they're showing a lot of really, really promising signs that suborbital launch could happen in the very near future, which is exciting. Like I mentioned, the Google Lunar X Prize teams are going up. The biggest competition prize ever is set for the end of 2015, which is going to unlock all kinds of things. I mean, there's an asteroid mining company that exists and makes money today. I mean, how amazing is that, right? You know, and then yeah, I mean, and then I mentioned some other things as well, but I think, you know, in terms of a permanent presence on the moon, it's probably not going to be people, but probably robots in the next 5 years. I'm talking about permanent presence, so maybe places to like charge so you don't have to send batteries every time. You can, you know, charge up while you're there. Commercial space station. Yeah, those are some of the things that I'm really excited about.
We have a question from Martin Wallner. He asked, what are software or hardware tools that you think are missing or not functioning yet that could take us a big step forward in space exploration?
Software or hardware? Software is on the autonomy side, I'd say. So there's a really big play, though. There's a lot of people at the moment trying to crack this nut. And I'm talking about space robotics in general, so spacecraft in orbit, spacecraft on planet. This is another area that's ripe for disruption, because you've got, I mean, it's really expensive to get there, you know, if you want to send something to the moon or to Mars. And so again, when it gets there, you really want it to work. And people are afraid of autonomy. A private company might be more willing to take some chances on that. And there's some really big advances happening there. Satellite diagnostics, you know, just having better communications. Machine-to-machine connections, so having a constellation of satellites in space that can talk to each other. So if you think about it, you've got the Earth, and you've got satellites, and there's ground. You know, how are you going to get that data down? You have to have a ground station network, so you have to have stations with antennas that can pull the signal down in various places. Otherwise, you know, if you have one satellite in one or a few ground stations, then it goes around, it takes an image, and then it has to wait for it to come back around and drop it off, right? Whereas if you had a network of ground stations, well, now you've got better coverage, and you wait. Then they pass over ground stations more often. Or even better yet, if you had a constellation of satellites and they were networked, and then at all times you have a satellite sitting over a ground station, and you could provide real-time access, essentially. So there's another big one. Propulsion for small satellites is a big one. At the moment, hardly anyone uses propulsion on small satellites. They sort of just launch them, and then they last for as long as they do. But when you start building more capable satellites that you want in space for longer, you're going to need some propulsion to keep it going. So electric propulsion is pretty cool.
What about refueling satellites in orbit?
Yeah, in-space servicing is very, very tricky politically. So, all right, so everyone talks about space debris, right? And I'm going to build a company to pull that junk down and be a space garbage man. Well, there's no mandate to bring that down, so who's going to pay you to do that? There's no real customer for it at the moment. So you're waiting on regulation on that front. And if you get, just from a purely business perspective, I mean, I realize that there's lots of stuff in space and great to pull it down, but there's an economic case to be made in terms of trying to get somebody to do that. And remember, I'm just here talking about the business side of things. So, if you start talking, okay, so this is a really interesting situation from a regulatory political perspective. So if you launch a satellite, so every time you launch something, you have to tell the United Nations who puts it on a register, and you have to, tell it what it's going to do and what type of technologies are on it and that sort of thing, right? This is how we keep things, so that they don't hit each other in orbit, and we can keep track of what's going on and what's up there and all that sort of thing. Almost every country subscribes to this registry. If you tell the UN that you're going to launch a satellite that can go up and connect to another satellite and fuel or defuel or hack into or, they're all dual purpose, right? So there's a lot of defense and military sort of considerations to take into account. So I see business plans for companies that are doing in-space servicing. They want to go up to them. They want to do repairs and that sort of thing. But if a satellite can do a repair on another satellite, it can also damage another satellite. And so just imagine two countries that don't get along so well that subscribe to this thing that are space powers, right? And imagine a citizen from one of those countries saying they're going to launch one of these things, and the citizen from the other country saying, we have billions of dollars or whatever currency of assets in space, there's no way we're letting you launch that. So I don't know how that's going to work, but there's a lot more to it than just launching something that works and does good, because usually if it does good, it can also do bad. So it's tricky.
As with any technology, right?
Yeah.
Cool. So you painted this future with a lot of opportunities, a lot of kind of economic opportunities in space. But what are the risks to that happening? Kind of what are the big things that are standing in the way of making that progress? Is it something political? Is it new technology that needs to be developed? What's kind of the barrier at this point? If any.
Well, there's a lot, actually. I mean, doing business in space is hard. For one, the regulatory issues that I've just outlined make it a bit difficult. It's completely disaggregated. If you're a new business doing, in an existing market and you're coming in to disrupt, you have the challenge of being a small business competing with some players who have been around for decades, right? And they know the industry, they know the business, they have government contacts. So it can be difficult. There's technical challenges. I mean, doing business in space is hard from a technical perspective. I mean, it's a lot of things that you don't consider. I mean, not that all of them can be overcome, and I mean, we figure out how to do it. I mean, so if you get up into space, and you have liquids flowing through for one reason or another, fuel or whatever, what have you, I mean, things don't flow the same in zero gravity. Things don't act the same. Everything that you do has to be, depending on where you put it in space, has to be radiation hardened. And you've got, a lot of technical things to think about. So having the right people is key. And I think, where I really want to go on that point is that we had the original space race in the Apollo era, right? And we were throwing a lot of money as a human species. We're throwing a lot of money at this thing, and we attracted a lot of technical talent, and they're all retiring because there was a lull after that, right? I mean, they got a lot of attention, but eventually, going to the moon, it was sort of the same footage over and over again. And with the space shuttle, it was sort of the same footage, over and over again, them launching, and people just stopped paying attention. And as people stopped paying attention, the enthusiasm behind it started to die down. Less kids started enrolling in these courses, science and technology and engineering and math. And I think now we're at a point where there's sort of a disconnect between a lot of experience that, I mean, these people are still around, they're just retired, right? But they're not really, and then you've got the new young ones coming in and trying to take over and, are taking over and starting to do really cool things. But I think that's a big challenge for us at the moment, is to see that that's happening and sort of find a way to bridge the gap. Hence, platforms like mentoring platforms could come in really handy for that, if we can get the old retiring guys to get on your site. But yeah, I think that's a really big challenge as well.
So to segue from there, what would be your advice for students who really want to get involved? Like, how can they start getting involved in the space industry? How can they start contributing to all of this new stuff happening in the spaces?
Yeah. So companies are hiring like mad. Some of these are really starting to take off. I'm sorry, you cannot avoid puns in this industry. So some of them are really starting to do really well, and they need people. The industry's reached a point, right? So for a long time, it only attracted the technical backgrounds, right? Because you have to build the thing before you can sell the thing. A sign of maturity of an industry or a market is when more and more business people start to get involved. I mean, when companies are starting to hire business development people, right, it's probably a pretty good sign. And I mean, you've got commercial lunar transportation companies hiring business developers, right? You've got rocket launch companies that are going to Mars hiring business people. And so, I mean, they're also hiring a lot of technical people as well to build the thing, but it's a really good sign in my mind that things are starting to mature, and this industry is sort of starting to take its next step into really reaching out to you and me in the mass market. So you can join a really cool startup. There's one way. You can start your own space business. There's a lot of incubators and accelerator type things, hubs, depending on where you're at in the world. The great thing is that space holds a special place in the hearts of a lot of people. So in the States, there's pockets of hubs of space activity all over the place, on the West Coast, East Coast, in the middle of the country. They're happening everywhere. I mean, I was in Stockholm last weekend, and they're really up on space, and they have incubators, and they have, in their tech hubs, they have people looking at space companies. In Australia, in the Middle East, in Africa, I mean, they're everywhere, wherever you're at. And so, plugging into the right people and finding people to help complement your skill set and just do the thing like you always would. I mean, it's never been easier to start a space company. Space has never been more within reach of startups and entrepreneurs like yourselves. And so that's my favorite approach. But then there's also, you can just join one of those innovation hubs as well. I mean, if you've got something to contribute, or you want to build your skill set, or you want to get close, maybe you've got a skill set that's applicable, but you don't have the space background, and you want to get some experience, you can join an innovation hub that focuses on these things. I mean, there's, again, in all of those areas that I just talked about, there's places where people are doing cool things.
We got another question coming in from Devin Kennifer. He asks, does this period of rapid innovation and progress look like a short window of opportunity before political and regulatory red tape start to temper the movement, or is there optimism for its ability to be future-proof?
Yeah, so there's been red tape and fear and controls by some governments already. That's not holding people back. People are finding ways around it. I'm doing a lot of work on spaceports at the moment, and I'm looking at the opportunity to build a spaceport in the UK. And an obvious operator would be space planes. That's rocket technology. You cannot export rocket technology from the States due to ITAR, which you may or may not be familiar with, but basically there's a list of dangerous things that the U.S. has identified that they don't want to export, and this is one of them. But there's ways to do it. And the industry is progressing, and I mean, as people become more comfortable with these things, I mean, there's a movement at the moment to remove satellites and spacecraft from that munitions list, right? And that's got a lot of steam. I mean, people have been trying to do this for a while now, but there's some things that have happened that are showing signs of, that make me optimistic. Operating it on a wet lease and basically, opening the door and getting this, space planes operated in other areas is a good way to get the ball moving, and we'll see what happens. But it basically comes down to we're not starting from scratch. We can look back a decade or 15 years ago and see, there was some successful space entrepreneurs, but a lot of unsuccessful ones, and we can see why they were unsuccessful, and we can see what's different this time around. It's the three big trends that I pointed to earlier. It's the new approach by entrepreneurs that makes me the most optimistic, because you never know, if you get enough entrepreneurs in here trying to solve problems, you never know what they're going to come up with. And I'm really excited to see what comes next. But, I mean, for me, what makes me the most optimistic is that disruptive innovation has happened throughout history, right? From the horse, the Model T coming in and disrupting the horse carriage industry. I mean, they lobbied against cars heavily. The telephone replacing telegraphy, LED light bulbs, emails over snail mail. I mean, in one lifetime, we've seen mainframe computers shrink down to personal computers to computers in your pocket. And we're seeing the same thing happen in space, from a bus-sized satellite going to a shoebox-sized satellite with similar capability, right? And you see this across the spectrum in space. And so, for me, I mean, it's so obvious that we are right at the, and then let me take one more step back. So things are happening a lot faster as well, and people are adopting technology a lot faster as well. And so, for the first time in history, maybe, that I think, we've seen that thing happen, the whole transformation from mainframes to pocket computers in a lifetime. And so we can see how the whole thing comes together. It's not like something we read about in books or, something that happened to our parents that's passed through. I mean, we've seen it happen in a lifetime, and it makes it a lot more real. And so it doesn't take a rocket scientist, it doesn't take, you don't have to be the smartest person in the world to read the runes and see that this thing is happening. So that's why I'm so optimistic.
We have another question from Jim. Here, Jim, I'll try to see if I can unmute you. Jim, are you there?
Yeah. Hey.
Yeah. Want to ask a question?
Hello.
Yeah. Hi, Chad. I just wanted to ask you, what do you think are the main issues or like risks or problems coming up that would encourage a potential investor to not invest in a space company, like a startup?
That's an easy one for me because I see it all the time. It's not focusing on solving a problem. So, you see so many times I see really, really smart people building cool things because they can. If you're not solving a problem, you don't have a business. If you don't have, and I'm not talking about, a technical problem or a problem for humanity or something like, from a pure business perspective, purely, like identifying a problem that exists that's a pain point for somebody. Like if you have a problem and I have a solution to it and it makes you feel the need, like you can imagine yourself reaching into your pocket and paying your hard-earned dollars for this thing, then you've probably got a business, because probably other people will feel the same way. But if, I see a lot of there's this cool, people are developing these cool new technologies, and I want to build a satellite constellation company, and I want to put, these cool new technologies on it, and then they start thinking about who they're going to attract and who they're going to look for customers, and it's exactly the inverse approach. Start with a problem, like sit down and think about an issue that exists, and then figure out how to fix that issue. Then you've got a business. Then you've got a business that people will buy your product or service, and you've got a business that people will invest in.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's good advice. I think we're running towards the end here. Maybe one last question. I like to ask this question for people who are students who are starting out their career. Is there anything in your career that you would have done differently? Is there anything that you would have definitely done the same? Kind of like, what's your big advice for students or young people starting out in the space industry?
Interesting. I've had a very unique, probably, entrance to this industry, a lot different than most of the people. As you said in the introduction, I'm a finance and economics undergrad. I was a business manager at a bank, managed a real estate portfolio. I was an aviation entrepreneur for a while, went to business school, and joined, got into the space industry while I was there. So how I found myself here was, I just have I had a lot of interest. I was spending a lot of time, watching TED Talks and sort of basically trying to fill my brain up with things that interested me, right? Like, this goes for anything. Mysteries of civilization, why is there underground caves in Turkey? What's happening in robotics? What's happening in neuroscience? All types of sort of things, just anything that was interesting to me. But for me, I just naturally sort of latched on to what was happening in space, and I was watching all the developments, and I was seeing what was happening, and I was probably spending as much or more time following the industry and the news and like on Twitter and whatever else than I was at my normal day job. But for me, it was always just a hobby. And it wasn't until I had a few minutes to sit and at business school to stop and think and say, what do I really want to do with myself? So then I just started reaching out to people and saying, my question that I was asking, I was reaching out to whoever I could. And I was, and when I got the right person on the phone, my question was, is the space industry even ready for business people? Like, is there even a place for me here? I'm really interested. I know what's going on. I've done my homework, but I just don't, And the response that I got was, absolutely, there's a serious lack of business people at the moment. The industry's starting to grow, and it needs people like you. And I never would have known that if I didn't ask. And to be honest, for a business person, I'm surrounded by a few hundred people, and they all want, okay, so that's a big generalization. Lots of them are bankers or wanted to be bankers or consultants or whatever, right? They sort of fit a mold. Very serious people, type A personalities, and telling them that you wanted to go work in space was sort of, it's not something that most people do. And for me, it was sort of, it was sort of like I was really interested, but I didn't know what to do with it. And so probably I think the most significant or defining factor of that whole experience was a friend of mine when I was just talking to, and somebody who I did talk to about these sort of aspirations or whatever, said, if you don't voice it, if you don't tell people what you want, if you don't start exploring that and just opening up and make yourself vulnerable, you'll never know. I had a conversation with a guy, asked that question, probably based on the conversation that I had with my friend, and the rest is history, and I've just sort of made my way since then. But it's a combination of sort of paying attention to what's going on around you, seeing, knowing what value you bring to the table, being able to articulate that, right? Be able to be a storyteller, be able to tell your story and why what you've done matters. Don't list off things that you've done, but be able to say why you did that thing, your reasoning behind doing it in the first place, and what, and and what came about and why it was important. Being able to do all of that will help you to define your value and what you bring, and that'll help you if you're paying attention to what's going on around you. I mean, you'll find the right opportunity. You'll find something that's interesting to you because you'll be reading about it anyway, or you'll be close to it anyway because it interests you, and then you'll find a way for yourself to fit in. Then after that, it's sort of, I mean, just go do it,
Thank you so much, Chad, for your time and for chatting with us today. It's been a very interesting chat. If anybody wants to learn more about the new space race, Chad's put together a package, which should be linked to on the events page. If we're currently in private beta on Pushpad, but if you want to sign up and see Chad's package, just sign up on the list on our main page, pushpad.com, and we'll just add you to the beta list right away so you can have access. So once again, thanks, Chad, for your time, and thank you, everybody, for joining us.
Thanks, guys.